do the introduction here for Joe, however, and I'll go through that here right now. Our speaker today is a man who has had a front row seat at some of the greatest sports events in history. He has interviewed the biggest names, covered the biggest events, and turned in some of the biggest expense accounts in TV history. He has won his 18 Emmys from the National Association of Television Arts and was inducted into the Emmys' prestigious Silver Circle for outstanding contributions to the broadcasting industry. Joe is also the 2019 inductee into the Minnesota Speakers Hall of Fame. He has written 2 books, Silent Impact and The Impact Blueprint. And we want everyone to brace themselves for impact. So we'll welcome Joe Schmidt when he gets here after the news. But in the interim, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be listening to his speech about Blue Impact, what he has to say for everyone, and then we'll be able to, we'll have probably a little bit of networking time and chatting before Joe is able to join us around 7 p.m. today. So we'll have our networking stuff a little bit on the front end, and then Joe will join us and be able to answer any questions and share some ideas with us. So let's enjoy Joe's talk.
We have heard it all in 2020. We're all in this together. We're all in the same boat. Well, those are all well-intentioned, but the truth is they might not exactly be true. We are not all in the same boat. We're in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat. Some boats right now have smooth sailing. Some are in choppy waters, some are heading toward the rocks, and some have already crashed on the rocks. But no matter where your boat is, you can do 2 things. You can listen and you can care. And when you listen and you care, you can make an impact. And that's what I want to talk about today. I want to help us all figure out ways to be more aware and intentional with the impact that we have in our personal life and in our professional life, because I think that all helps us lead a life of significance. I've written a couple of books on it, as John mentioned. The first one, Silent Impact, and the second one was with the Impact Blueprint, a step-by-step journey to a life of significance. And we have found out through research that we make our biggest impressions when we're not trying to be impressive. Now, let me start you off with a question. If there were a going away party tonight, who would the most people show up for in your business? Think about that for a second, because that person is having a tremendous impact on your business. That person is having an impact on the culture of your business. And that's what we want to talk about, how we can be more that person. Now, I want to start off with an apology. I realize I am talking to a bunch of people in Kansas City, home of the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. So I apologize for having the Minnesota Vikings helmet in the background. I've been a sportscaster in the Twin Cities for over 30 years. I cover the Minnesota Vikings, so I never get to go to a Super Bowl. And by the way, I put it up there to remind you that the very first Super Bowl that the Chiefs won was against the Minnesota Vikings back in Super Bowl III. So that's why we have that up there. I covered a coach in Minnesota by the name of Roy Griak. He was the head coach at the University of Minnesota track and field team. Roy had a very successful career. He coached the Gophers for over 30 years. He coached them to Big Ten championships. He had athletes on his teams that won Big Ten titles, national titles. He had athletes who competed in the Olympics, a very successful career. Well, as Roy retired, he stayed as a volunteer with the program. And as he was 90 years old, he was getting ready to pass on. And I started reading some tributes to Roy on social media, on Facebook and on Caring Bridge. And I noticed a lot of the names. They were the Big Ten champs, the national champs, the Olympians. And something struck me. Not one of those people wrote, "I would have never made it to the Olympics without you. I was a champion because you were my coach." Not one. They all said things like, "I'm a better man because you were my coach. I'm a better parent today because you were my coach. I just closed the biggest business deal of my life using Roy Griak 101. And it got me to thinking, Roy Griak lived a life of significance, not because of the trophies he won and the gold medals he had in his trophy case. He lived a life of significance because of the impact that he had on other people. In our research, we found out there are 3 areas that you need to concentrate on to make an impact: purpose, persistence, and passion. Purpose, you align your actions with your values. When you align your actions with your values, you can make an impact. Persistence. You're persistent in your positivity. You're persistent in your preparation. And last but not least, passion. These people are the heart and soul of your organization because they are passionate. They not only care about you as a professional coworker, they care about you as a human being too. They want to be there to share in your successes, and they want to be there to make sure that they're there for you when things don't go well. You put them all together, purpose, persistence, and passion, and you get what I call an impact player. Now, as a sports anchor, when I talk about an impact player, what does an impact player do? They make everybody on the field of play better when they're out there themselves. You can be an impact player too, and you become more aware and intentional with the impact you have on other people, how you lead your team, what example that you set. See, by the time I'm done here today, I think we're all going to have a different view on how we look at impact and how we can make a bigger impact. So I'm just going to give you a little example now. On the count of three, could everybody just say out loud to your computer, no one's going to be able to hear you, what color is a yield sign? 1, 2, 3. Now, my guess is 80 to 90% of you said yellow. A yield sign has been red and white since 1974. You see, sometimes there are things in our head that we look at that we need to change. Sometimes we just need to look at it from a different angle. And that's what we're going to do today on impact. I talked about an impact player. Well, I know an impact player who's an impact player on the field as an athlete, but also an impact player in life. And in Kansas City, you might know who this gentleman is. Joe Mauer. He had a terrific career with the Minnesota Twins, played a lot of games against Kansas City. I know that for sure. Joe was a 6-time All-Star, 3-time batting champ, 1-time American League Most Valuable Player. Had over 2,000 hits in his career, had a fantastic career. 20 years ago, Joe was a senior at Cretin-Derham Hall High School in St. Paul, Minnesota. Now, in every high school, there's a lunchroom. And in every lunchroom, there's a cool table. Because wherever Joe Mauer sat 20 years ago at Cretin-Derham Hall High School was the cool table. He was the big man on campus. He was recruited by every major college football program to be their starting quarterback. He was an all-state guard in basketball, and of course, he was a fantastic baseball player. Joe was tall, good-looking, and soon to be very rich. I'd take any of those three for 10 minutes. Well, Joe ended up being drafted by the Minnesota Twins and had a successful career. Now, when Joe was a senior, every day after his 4th-hour class, he would walk a special needs student who happened to be blind to the lunchroom and ask him and invite him to sit down at his table, the coolest table on campus, every day. And I said to Joe, Joe, why did you do this? And Joe's answer was very simple, but yet it was very profound. He said, because it was the right thing to do, the right thing to do. I think you could say it was his purpose. He was aligning his actions with his values. And because of that, it made an impact. I put my reporter's cap on and I found Mike Hawley, the young man who Joe walked every day to that lunchroom. And I said to Mike, Mike, what did it mean to you to have the coolest guy on campus invite you to sit down at his table? Mike said it was great. He said he had never had a friend who was an athlete before. And now we sat down at the table with all the jocks and they swapped sports stories and had a great time every day. So then I started thinking, silent impact. That's what we really do. We make a silent impact. We make our biggest impressions when we're not trying to be impressive. Who else did this very unselfish, purposeful move make an impact on? So I found 6 guys who sat around that table every day with Joe Mauer and Mike Hawley 20 years ago. And then the stories started to come in. They said that Joe would walk Mike to his next class once lunch was over. By the end of the first quarter, the guys at that table would fight over who got to walk Mike to his next class. Wednesdays was pizza day at Cretin-Derham Hall. And Mike would invariably spill some crumbs on his clothing, some pizza sauce on his chin or his cheek. Joe would nonchalantly grab a napkin, wipe him off, brush him off, and get him ready for the next class. By the end of the first quarter, they were all doing this. These are high school kids, the most selfish creatures on God's green earth. But Joe was making an impact. And the impact he made was real, it was powerful, profound, contagious, and it can last a long, long time. There was a teacher who monitored that lunchroom every day, who was so inspired by what he saw that he wrote a poem. And the poem was called Lunch with Mike, but it was really a tribute to Joe Mauer. And in the poem, it said, Joe, for the rest of your career, people will judge you by what you do with the bat and the ball, but they don't know you. I know your heart because what I saw every day at Cretin Durham Hall. You never know when you're going to make an impact. And it could be a positive impact. It could be a negative impact. We make an impact in everything we do and everything we say, how we act, how we react, what our attitude is, what our body language is. It all leaves a mark. So how can we all be more aware and intentional with the impact that we have? I'm going to ask you to get involved here a little bit. We'll have a couple of interactive things, and this is one of the things we're going to do. In your chat box, I'm going to ask you to respond and write down an answer to this question. What are some traits that you could do in your business to make a bigger impact, not only on your employees, your vendors, your customers, everybody around your community? What can you do? I started doing impact resolutions. Now, impact resolutions are a little bit like New Year's resolutions, except if you're like me, and my New Year's resolution by January 15th, I've already screwed that up. Impact resolutions are different. You take a trait, and that's the trait you concentrate on for every month. And every month, you make yourself a new impact resolution. And I would suggest that even doing this with your team, it can help your team figure out ways to make a bigger impact and improve the culture of your operation. So, for example, you might want to be more patient. You might want to be more respectful, communication. Whatever the case is, every month, that's what you concentrate on. I started off by doing it to be less petty, less jealous. It's a human trait. You know, somebody takes credit for something you did, you fire off an email. Somebody's kid's named captain of the basketball team, should have been your kid, you let everybody know. Whenever I had this feeling of pettiness or jealousness, I remember to myself the impact resolution that I made. So it really, really works. So if you would, in the chat box, write down a trait or two that you think is important. Because I think what we all should do is map out the next 6 months, maybe map out the next year. And as I mentioned, maybe do this with your team. I did it for one business where they had accountability partners. And these two women got together and they decided that they weren't going to gossip. So for the entire month, they didn't gossip, and they checked on each other to make sure they weren't gossiping. It worked like a charm. And when that month ended, boy, did they have a lot to talk about. Impact resolutions. Let's see if we got anybody responding here. And in the chat box, I have one: focus on listening. Do you listen with your eyes? Because a lot of times, if you're not listening with your eyes, you're not hearing really well. Listen more than you talk. You can't listen. You can't listen when you're working on your phone. You can't listen when you're sending out an email to somebody. So listening is very important, because communication is usually the biggest breakdown of any business. Whenever a business, a relationship, anything fails, communication is usually one of the reasons why. Focus on listening. Be present. Be present. Be involved. Be all in. We had constant curiosity. Curiosity. John Wooden, the late great basketball coach at UCLA, has a fantastic quote that I love. He says, "It's what you learn after you know it all that really counts." It's what you learn after you know it all that really counts. And I can understand that anybody in the business world understands this, because you always have to be changing. You always have to be on top of it. Give the benefit of the doubt first. Let's see what else we had here. Don't rush important conversations. You know, make sure that you kind of have a default position. Be humble. Be humble. Work hard and be humble. These are all great things that you can do. And here's what I would suggest. I would suggest, if you don't do it with your team and you want to do it for yourself, I have a sticky note up in the bathroom on my bathroom mirror. So every morning when I wake up and every night before I go to bed, it's the first and the last thing I see every day. And it keeps it top of mind. Some people put it on their phone. Some people put a sticky note on their computer. Whatever it is, it helps remind you, because when you're more aware and more intentional with the impact you have, you can make a bigger impact. And it's the little things that really do turn out to be the big things. So purpose, align your actions with your values. All right, we want to move on to persistence. You need to be persistent in your positivity and persistent in your preparation. I remember the time I had to be the most persistent in my entire life. It's when I started dating. Yeah, I had a problem when I started dating, and here was my problem. Every time I brought a girl home, my mom didn't like her. It didn't matter every time. So finally I got smart, and I went out and I found a girl that kind of looked like my mom. She dressed like my mom. I know this sounds kind of funky. She wore the same perfume as my mom. I brought her home, and it was great. My mom loved her. Now I had a new problem. My dad didn't like her. A little bad humor there, but persistence. You know, the US of A, the Declaration of Independence, one of the greatest documents ever written, and the US of A is not perfect, but we do have certain inalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if you want to be happy, you need to be persistent in your positivity. Think about people you like to be around in your life, and I guarantee you they are positive people. You see, I like to live by the 90-10 rule. I don't know if you ever heard this or not. I think if we all look at our lives, I think even in this crazy time in 2020, I think we can all say that somewhere around 90% of our lives are good, if not great. And 10% need a little bit of work. Where people lose balance, where people get out of whack, is when they spend 90% of their time on the 10%. Spend 90% of your time on the good stuff, and that will help you stay persistent in your positivity. Another way to stay persistent in your positivity is by getting rid of as many negative things as you can in your life. Get rid of negative words. Listen to the words you speak. Are you speaking negative words? Figure out ways to get rid of negative thoughts. We all have negative thoughts. How do you distract yourself when you have a negative thought? And last but not least, have the courage to get rid of negative friends. My wife and I were out to dinner a few years back. But about halfway through the dinner, we realized this was a really negative night. We were with some friends we hadn't seen in a while, had a lot of mutual friends. They were talking trash about some of our friends. They were complaining about the food, complaining about the service, bragging about their kids. It was a completely negative night. And on the ride home, my wife, Laura, said, "Joe, that wasn't very fun." I said, "No, it wasn't." And I said, "Let's not go out with them anymore." So we only have so many nights we can choose who we socialize with. Let's not pick negative. And ever since then, we've made excuses. We've pushed them out. Now, sometimes it's hard to get rid of negative people because you might work with them. They might be family members, but figure out ways to avoid them and push them out. Stay away from negativity and help you stay persistent in your positivity. Now, we also need to be persistent in our preparation. Now, in the television business, we can be as prepared as we want, and sometimes things just don't work out. I'm sure it's the same way in your business. I want you to sit back and watch this video, and we'll discuss it when I'm done.
Кто-то тянет к большим водным артериям, а кто-то довольствует. Looks like Ruben is in the lead, and here comes Ellen. That was a bad idea. At Riverside Park, Rob Webb, Global News. I'm so pale. Today's snow is crippling much of the Washington lowlands.
The Wolves take an 8-point lead right away, but it went away. The Blazers, the Blazers lead at the half. Thursday night in the NFL. Overnight tonight, down to about 17, light and variable breeze tomorrow. Oh, rats. Part of those scandals. And what will it mean for the wider region? I think one of your children has just walked in. I mean, shifting sands in the region. Do you think relations with the North may change?
I would be surprised if they do. Pardon me. My apologies.
Region.
My apologies.
Be more successful this time around. Already said I will not be making any comment.
Here's the big picture. We've all had hiccups before, right? Cypress to Copperfield as well. 5:36. Excuse me. Scattered showers and a couple of thunderstorms during the overnight. Compared to heavy rain. Excuse me. And record low temperatures.
The proper way to sled down a hill that's more muddy than snowy. They say no matter what, just have fun. Use your hands and make sure you steer. From the snowman.
And thought nothing will ever be as cool as crystal meth.
Pepsi. Following her victory speech, Kim asked her and her supporters to say a prayer for Gina Roberson, who remains hospitalized for a stress-related illness.
12 pounds that they can throw. Linda Carson, ABC7. Would you not eat my pants?
I said, what are you doing running? You're saying it was really good out?
It's the perfect texture for running. Very low impact on its dry snow, so your feet don't get wet.
So go ahead and keep on the run. I'm sorry to have kept you, but I appreciate you guys talking with us. All right, thanks. We've seen a lot of people out here, like you said, running, sledding, just enjoying it. One thing, oops, that can happen.
Of a visit to the Philippines. Emily King is at the White House this morning. Emily, has the White House more or less set the stage to scrap the trip?
Hey, how do I know, Connie? Oh my God. I'm very sorry, Connie. Good morning. The White House has obviously kept a very close eye on the situation in the Philippines.
A local man spots something suspicious and he decides to spring into action. He has done something that is very good.
We zijn hier in Kampen, een van de 3 prachtige historische Hansesteden in de IJsseldelta. Want hier wordt binnenkort het grootste paasevenement van Nederland georganiseerd. Zeelkampen. Burgemeester, wat is er nou zo bijzonder met Zeelkampen?
Als je de mooiste... Dat gaat niet goed.
All right, so I got to stop that real quick. I'm sorry. There, I apologize there. We see the best laid plans sometimes don't work. Now, I showed that video because it's a little bit of a fun break from what we're doing, but I also do it because stuff happens, right? When we're working, when we're doing plans, stuff happens, and it's how we react and how we respond that we are judged. That's the most important thing to realize. You see, sometimes I think we get paralyzed by fear, and sometimes we fear of looking bad. But in the business world, like Lucas before, when Lucas was on, and Lucas had $1,000 and started a business, he had to get rid of fear. How many of you guys remember these? Any of you ever have a pair of these? They're called Zubas. And back in the 1980s, these crazy pants were started by a couple of guys in a weightlifting gym in Roseville. They decided that the pants, the regular sweatpants they were making didn't fit right, so they started making these crazy pants. A very long story short, that company ended up doing over $100 million in business, and you might still see some people wearing Zubas around every once in a while. But what I liked about Zubas was not only how they turned this business, they saw a problem and had a solution. That's the way they made a business. But their logo, their saying on the logo was, "Dare to be different." Dare to be different. And I think sometimes we get paralyzed by fear. And sometimes we put imaginary hurdles in front of us, imaginary brick walls. If you want to be fearless, you got to figure out how to get through those walls, how to break them down, how to get around them, however it is that you can navigate and get around those walls. Be persistent in your positivity, persistent in your preparation, and you can make an impact. Last but not least is passion. Once again, think about people you like to be around in your life. Think about people who are successful in their business, and I guarantee you they are passionate people. You can feel their passion. I married my wife because she's the most passionate person I know. Just last night, I came home and she had a glass of wine and she goes, "I love you. I don't know how I made it all these years without you." And I said, well, honey, I love you too, but are you sure that's not the wine talking? She said, "Yes, I'm sure. I was talking to the wine." So passion sometimes has to play out in the business world, and that's the way you develop loyalty. I did a presentation for a group of Wendy's franchisees, owners, and general managers, and afterwards, a woman came up to me and said, "I understand this whole impact idea, and I understand that sometimes it can be silent impact, and that we make our biggest impressions when we're not trying to be impressive. I want to tell you a story that happened in my store." She said, "Every day an elderly gentleman would come through the drive-through window for breakfast, and every day he was waited on by the same woman. It was a lady who dropped her kids off at school early and wanted to make the family a few extra dollars doing the drive-through window at Wendy's. And the GM said, "I wish I had 100 of her. She was the best employee I ever had. She was fantastic at customer service. When she said, 'Good morning, how you doing? Have a great day,' she meant every single word of it." Well, one day, this old man who had been coming through the drive-through window for breakfast for the last month or so pulled the car over, parked, and walked in. And he asked the GM if he could see the person who had been the lady who had been waiting on him the last couple of months. And the GM said, "Sure." So out from behind the counter, the lady comes, and the old man stands in front of her, and he says, "May I give you a hug?" And she says, "Sure." He gives her a big old burly bear hug, and when he lets go, he says, "I just had to come here and thank you today." You see, every morning when I came in here for breakfast, I was on the way to the hospital to see my wife, and she went to the good Lord last night. But every day I came in here, you reminded me of her before she got sick. Nobody ever left a conversation with my wife without feeling better about themselves. And that's what you did for me. It's called the second thank you, when you go back and thank somebody who's had that monumental moment in your life. You see, it is the little things that sometimes can make the big things. I heard about a nun from northern Minnesota who was just a prime example of silent impact. So I put my reporter's cap on, looking for Sister Helen Morosla. And I found her in a newspaper in northern Minnesota, the Brainerd Dispatch, in the obituary section. It said that Sister Helen was born in 1935. She became a Catholic nun, and she taught in Catholic schools in Minnesota, Kentucky, and Texas. She died in the year 2000, and she lived a life of servitude. But what it didn't say was the impact that Sister Helen had on the world back then, and the impact she's still having today, because that's how this works. Sister was teaching third grade in a Catholic school in Morris, Minnesota, in northern Minnesota. But into her classroom walks a young kid by the name of Mark Eklund. Now, Mark's a pretty good kid. He talked way too much. At one time, Sister put some Scotch tape over his mouth to get him to shut up. That didn't work. We fast forward a couple of years, and Sister's now teaching high school math. And into her classroom walks Mark Eklund, a little taller, a little more handsome, still just a little bit of a troublemaker, but they had a great relationship. Well, one week, Sister was trying to teach this class a new math concept, and the kids were just not getting it. Sister knew she had to change the atmosphere in the classroom. So she told everybody, take out a sheet of paper. And the kids thought, oh no, a pop quiz. She goes, no, here's your assignment. For the rest of the hour, I want you to write down all your fellow classmates' names down the left-hand side of the paper. And then I want you to spend the rest of the hour writing down the nicest thing you can say about each and every one of your classmates. So the kids got right on the assignment. And when the bell rang, they all turned their paper in to Sister. And over the weekend, Sister compiled everybody an individual list of all the traits that people put on that list. And on Monday, she handed it out when the kids got back to school. And right away, she could tell the atmosphere and the culture of the classroom had changed. People were laughing and smiling. And when she started teaching, everybody was focused. And soon this math problem, which nobody understood on Friday, was understood by all on Monday. Sister thought success. We now fast forward a couple more years, and Sister's returning from vacation, and she lands at the Minneapolis-St. Paul airport. She's picked up by her dad for the ride back up to northern Minnesota. And on the ride back up, her dad says, honey, the Eklunds called. And Sister goes, oh, how is Mark? I've been thinking about him so much lately. And her dad says, honey, I'm afraid to tell you, Mark died in the Vietnam War. His funeral is tomorrow. And the family wants you to come to the funeral. Well, Sister Helen went to Mark's funeral, and he got a full military salute. At his gravesite, he got a 21-gun salute. And a young soldier approached Sister Helen and said, were you Mark's math teacher? And she said, yes, I was. He said, I served with Mark in Vietnam. He talked about you a lot. Sister was stunned. The family had invited everybody out to the family farm for lunch to finish the celebration of Mark Eklund's life. And at that lunch, Sister was approached by Mark's parents. They said the Army had sent back Mark's belongings and they wanted her to see something. Out of a plastic bag, they pulled a wallet. And out of that wallet, they pulled out a tattered, crinkled piece of paper with yellowed Scotch tape on it. It was the list. Mark had carried the list with him to his dying day. Soon some of Mark's classmates gathered around. One said, I have my list, it's in my wedding album. Another one said, I have my list, it's in my sock drawer. A third, a gentleman, pulled out his wallet and pulled out a tattered, crinkled piece of paper. They all had their list. Sister wrote an article for a religious education magazine trying to inspire young teachers with passion to let the kids know that you care. Let them know that they should care about each other. And before she died, she was given one interview about the list. And she said, what were the lessons you were trying to teach those kids so long ago? And she said, the lessons were very simple. There are two of them. You can always find something nice to say about everybody. And we all need to praise more, condemn less. Praise more, condemn less. I know that the lessons that Sister Helen taught are alive and kicking today, because I found 6 of Mark Eklund's classmates. All 6 said they either still physically had the list or they remember every single word on the list. Judy Swanson said on her list, she was funny, she was a good athlete, and she had nice long legs. Vicki McNally said on her list, she was good at art, she was loyal, and she had luscious lips. So we know the hormones were raging for at least one of the kids in Sister Helen's class. Jim Halby was not at Mark Eklund's funeral. He had a pretty good excuse. He was half a world away fighting in the war in Vietnam himself. And in his wallet was the list. And I said to Jim, Jim, why did you bring that list with you to Vietnam? And he said, Joe, I don't know for sure, but he goes, I saw it on my dresser the night before I went. And I thought, you know what, if I have a bad day in Vietnam, I can look at it and it might make me feel better. And he goes, I had a lot of bad days in Vietnam. All the people I talked to said if they had to name the most influential people in their life, Sister Helen would be high on their list. Who's the most influential people in your life? Who helped you in your career? Who helped you get to where you are today? Who was there to support you when things were tough? Or maybe more importantly, who was there to kick you in the behind when you needed it? If you could build your own monument to the most influential, impactful people in your life, who would you put on your Mount Rushmore of influence? This is an exercise I think you're going to do in the next breakout session. And I want to make it a little bit more difficult for you. You can't put your parents on that list. That's just a little bit too easy. Want to dig deep and figure out who you can put on your list. And this is a great team building operation. You want to learn more about your team, do this. I did a leadership conference where I had 100 kids from 50 different schools that were leaders. And I worked with the kids in the morning And I worked with their parents came. I worked with them in the afternoon. And at night, we put them all back together. And I had them compare their Mount Rushmore of influence. When the conference was done, I had a line on this side asking me, the parents telling me I learned more about my kid today than I did in the first 16, 17 years. And on the other side, I had parents or kids telling me the same thing about their parents. We make our biggest impressions when we're not trying to be impressive. You know, I did this conference and I did this exercise to a group of prison guards. And there was a guy in the back of the room who raised his hand. He said, I want to talk about one of the guys on my Mount Rushmore, my brother, Tim. He said, Tim didn't get on the list until he passed away. And I'm sorry, I'm going to go a minute or two over, but I want to finish this story. Tim didn't get on that list until he passed away. He said, I grew up in northern Minnesota. We had I had a lot of great brothers and sisters. We were a very athletic family, but Tim was special. He said, Tim got a job in Columbus, Ohio. And when Columbus was awarded the National Hockey League franchise, Tim wanted to get a job with the team. Well, Tim ended up being the elevator operator on game day for all the players, their families, the executives, their families. But he wasn't just a normal operator of an elevator. He got to know the kids' names. He had nicknames for the players. He had gifts and candy all the time. He became part of the team. Well, unfortunately, Tim passed away from ALS. And his brother Mark went down to the funeral in Columbus. And the entire Columbus Blue Jackets team showed up at the funeral for an elevator operator. He said, that's when he went on my list, because I realized that even when you have a small task, you can make an impact. But he said, Joe, you gave me goosebumps when you were talking today. Remember when I said we were all pretty good athletes growing up? He said, Tim was the best. Tim ran track in college. His coach was Roy Griak of the University of Minnesota. We all need to be more aware and intentional with the impact we have. And the secret is this: when you get your breakout groups, think about this. It's not about other people liking you. That's not the secret to make an impact. It's about them liking themselves. And if you can be the person that helps make that happen, guess what? Someday when they do this exercise, they're going to put you on their Mount Rushmore themselves.
We have our guest of honor here this evening, Joe Schmidt. It's great to have you here, sir. Thank you so much. We know that you've got a tight schedule, wrapping up the news here and everything, but we enjoyed watching your talk. It was really great. My name is Adam Enrica. I'm sorry my camera doesn't work on my laptop right now. I'm the president of the Eagle Group Minnesota Veterans, and I just want to say that all these people that are here this evening are just some really great, amazing people. I've got transitioning military members, veterans, people that are familiar and just love helping military members and veterans, and they're just really great folks. And they do so many great things for the people that are coming out of the military and the veterans that are transitioning here in the area. It's my honor to be around with them. And so I appreciate everything that they do. And I want to thank you for taking some time to be with us here this evening. I'd love to turn it over to you at least here for a moment, and then we can go and press forward as you would like to, sir.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you so much for having the opportunity to be here, and thank you to the veterans for your service, for all you've done in the country. I know that almost gets to be a cliche now, but I want to let you know that I mean it from the bottom of my heart. My dad was an old Navy guy. He was 16 going on 17 years old, and he lied to get into the Navy, and he was in the end of World War II. So, and he was always very proud of his honorable discharge from the Navy. And so we grew up in a very patriotic family and understood what service was all about. And I remember I had a Marine recruiter come over to the house, and he was in his dress blues. And, I was in high school as a senior. I was trying to decide what to do. And I remember he walked out, and then my mom and dad are looking at me, now what? And then, anyway, I decided that I was going to go in a different direction, but it was pretty tempting. So I often wonder what would happen and what my life would look like now had I done that. So, well, thank you for also watching that video. I was hoping to come on live with you guys and do that presentation and cater it more toward you, but because I had to be on at the air that time, we came up with this way to kind of make it work. So I guess what I'd like to do is maybe open it up to questions or comments or ideas, and go from there. I study people who make an impact. And maybe I'll just tell a quick story on how this started. As a broadcaster, and I've been at KSTP since 1985, and you get asked to speak at a lot of different events like this. And when I first started getting asked to speak to Rotaries and Lions clubs and Optimists and veterans groups, I would get up there and tell sports stories, and I'd get up there and do the win one for the Gipper stories and talk a little bit about how TV is done. And I thought that was magic. Well, all of a sudden I started telling some stories about athletes who made an impact, or a coach who had an impact on me, that it was the little things that really turned out to be the big things. And people started saying, you got to tell more of those stories. You got to write a book. You got to do this. And I started to get asked to speak more. But the next thing I knew, I had written 2 books. I had a full speaking business along with doing a television. And it's turned into a real passion of mine. I mean, I'm lucky enough that in my career, I've loved sports, so I've been able to work in sports. I love TV. I've been able to work in TV. And then along the line, I found a true passion of mine, and that's studying people who make an impact and figuring out what they have as part of their DNA that makes them special, and how we can all live that life of impact. If we make it part of our DNA, we can live this life of significance. I'm 100% convinced that the happier people are tells me that they give of themselves, and the world doesn't revolve around them. And sometimes it takes years of experience and years of mistakes before we kind of figure it out. So I'm hoping to quicken that process a little bit for everybody. We're all human. We're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to slip. But if we're all a little bit more aware and intentional with the impact we have on everybody, if we think about other people, if we realize that you never know when the person sitting next to you is going through a lot of pain and is going through something heavy, and sometimes they just need something positive in your life, and you could be that person. You can smile, you can give a compliment, you can spend time, you can ask questions, you can listen, you can show empathy. And people who do that just have a much more fulfilling life. And so that's what I've learned from the best of the people who make impact. And that's why I have a passion going out and telling these stories. So with that, I guess we can open up the questions. I don't know whether you want to do it in the chat line or whether you want to do it, open up mics. That's completely up to you. I see someone wrote in the chat line, they have my books, both of them. The first book I wrote was Silent Impact, Influence Through Purpose, Persistence, and Passion. And the second one was The Impact Blueprint, a step-by-step journey to a life of significance. I'm not trying to sell books, but I'd like to let people know that I've worked on this. That some of the stories and some of the things, I'm never the smartest guy in the room, but I'm always try to ask the smartest questions and try to figure out who the smartest guy in the room is, and you can learn a lot from that person. So.
Well, that's great. So I think what we'll do here is we've got a couple folks here. Joe, we're going to watch we'll take a look and see if anyone either raises their hand or if they put something in the Q&A, and we have the ability to unmute people as well. I'll propose one for starters that I thought about while you were talking. And this may be one that I'll caveat it first by saying that one, if you don't want to answer this one, I totally understand. Or two, if this would be better to save towards the end, that's fine. But I'm really curious, with all the people that you've met from this, not just sports, but just in your life in general, because you've been, you clearly say that you've been very blessed to meet some really great people. But who's on your Mount Rushmore of influence?
And that's a great question, and that's one I give to people. And quite frankly, I tell people that you can't put your parents on your list. And I break my own rule but my rule's a little bit different. So I'll tell you my list. My dad is on my list. But my dad's on my list. It's not my dad my dad died when I was 25 years old. So I went a long time without my dad, but I've spent the rest of my life trying to make him proud of me. So it's the spirit of my dad that is on that list, because my dad had a gift. He made everybody feel like they were his best friend. I remember at his funeral to this day, there had to be 100 people to tell me, oh, I'm Bill, I was your dad's best friend. I'm Bob, I was your dad's best friend. And he had this great ability to make everybody feel better when they left a conversation with him than when they came to him. The second one on my list is my high school football coach, Bill Collar. I was at the point where I was at a crossroads. I was either going to use my skills and go bad, or I was going to use my skills and go good. And he saw that. He was aware of that. And one night after a Letterman's Club meeting, he hauled me into the gym and we had a little come to Jesus meeting. And at that time, he said, Joe, you got so many things in front of you. You can do this. You can go to college. You can do this. Nobody had ever told me I could go to college. He was the first person that ever told me that. And from that minute on, I wanted to go to college. And, my family just was a family that you went out, you learned a trade, you went to the service, you did something, and you had a fulfilling life that way. But that was the first person that ever told me that. And from that moment on, I was going to college. The third one was a guy I worked with in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, in my broadcasting career, John Campbell. I just learned about the business from him because he was such a great storyteller. And he realized that the key to being great in broadcasting had nothing to do with how fancy you were, how smart you were, whatever, but it was how you could tell a story. And John was really good at that. And then the last guy on my list is Tony Dungy. I had the pleasure of working with Tony when he was with the Vikings here. I'm a big fan of his books. If you haven't read Uncommon yet, you should read it. It's a fantastic book. Tony is a man who walks the walk and talks the talk. And Tony could, if Tony wanted to, he could still be coaching football, making millions of dollars. But Tony is doing broadcasting and using his platform to work with dads, especially dads in the African-American community, to be part of their family. And he's dedicated his life to just being a great person. So there was no foolishness or nothing with Tony. So I really admire Tony. So that's my Mount Rushmore. And if you want to have some fun, do this with your kids, your grandkids. It's you'll learn a little bit about them.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that very much. That's we really appreciate that, and a lot of great insight on how those people made the list. So would like to open it up to hear for anyone else to ask some questions. And Bob, I think do people have the ability to unmute themselves, or do we have to do it? How does it?
I just muted myself. They have the ability to unmute themselves. So I do have a comment for Joe. Is during his video when he asked us to enter in our chat boxes our own heroes, our own impact players. First thing that came to mind is everybody who volunteers here at Eagle Group and those who work at MACV and disabled American veterans. We have some here from the VA helping other veterans. I tell you, every one of us who are working with other veterans, we are making an impact on someone's life. And we're surrounded with good people right here in this meeting. So I just want to make that observation.
Thank you, Bob. The line I always use is, I have yet to meet someone miserable who gives of themselves. And you are obviously a giver. You know, there are two kinds of people in this world. There are net givers and net takers. You have people you'll meet, they'll say, hi, how you doing? How can you help me? Or other people will say, hi, how you doing? How can I help you? And I think we all want to be the latter. We all have those friends who the only time we ever hear from them is when they need something, you know. Push them out a little bit. I always call it like the rings on a tree, the circle rings on a tree. The closer to the middle, those should be your real friends who give of themselves. Those should be the people who are most like you. And the other ones, you can put them out a couple of rings.
That's great.
Thank you.
All right, open the floor. Anyone else would like to unmute themselves and ask a question, please feel free to jump in.
You can ask a sports question too if you want. I happen to pretend I know something about that too.
Hey, Joe, Zach Johnson from MACV. What do you got for a line on the Chiefs in Tampa this weekend?
There we go.
There you go. You know what? I think that the line is 3 points in favor of the Chiefs. You'd have to give up 3 points. I think the Chiefs just have too much speed. When I watch Kansas City, I'm like, speed kills. And, you know, they just have so many weapons and so much speed that I have the feeling that they're going to take care of Tom Brady. And, you know, Tom Brady's pretty amazing. I thought when he played the Vikings, he was not anywhere near as good as when he played in the NFC Championship game last week. He was really something against Green Bay. But if I had to bet, and I don't do that because I've been around too many sporting events to realize a ball can be tipped, a bad call, and things happen. But if I had to bet, I would say Kansas City's going to win because of their speed.
I agree with that.
Good.
Joe, John Sweeney here, and thank you again for agreeing to work with us in our different format because of your schedule and, doing the pre-recorded session. I saw you at the Lakeville Chamber of Commerce event and I knew that we had to have you here. But tell me, all you folks that are in the sports world, I know that you worked with or dealt with Sid Hartman. And now we lost Sid fairly recently, but I met Sid. I was the vice president and general manager of the Decathlon Athletic Club, and we hosted the the Hobie Baker Award every year, and that's where I met Sid for the first time. But why don't you tell me, how your interactions with Sid, and if he made an impact on you?
Well, he certainly had an impact on me from the standpoint of, a guy being 99 and then 100 years old, still working the way he did. I mean, he was amazingly at everything. It was incredible. I always, my favorite couple of favorite Sid stories are one on the radio. One time he was because Sid would have malaprops, where he would say the wrong things. He was talking about Jim Finks, the former Vikings general manager, died of cancer, and he said, "Well, the guy smoked like a fish," to which I think means that he also drank like a chimney. Sid would sometimes mix things up a little bit, but I went through about a cancer 10 years ago, and Sid, every single time he saw me, he'd ask me how my health was, and he'd be very concerned. Are you seeing a good doctor? Have you been down to Mayo? Sid was, that care part of him would always come out. And I always thought that was pretty amazing. Here's a 100-year-old man worried about my health. I also remember, this was when Sid was 98 or 99. At a Vikings game at US Bank Stadium, the press has an elevator. We all go down, so we got to go to the locker room. And the locker room happens to be about 50 yards away from the press elevator. So we take the elevator down, and I'm on there, and I'm next to Bob Sansevier, and Sid's just in front of us. And Sid's got a walker by then. And all of a sudden, everybody's hurrying. Once the elevator door opens, we're all hurrying, trying to get down to the locker room. And all of a sudden, I look at Bob, and I said, "Look at this, Bob. We're having a hard time keeping up to Sid." He was going faster than we were. It was just incredible. But your greatest strength is always your greatest weakness. Sid loved scoops, and he'd do anything to get a scoop. And sometimes he maybe went across the line a little bit, but we all love Sid, and there will never ever be another one. That's for sure. That's what they talk about all the time. There will never ever be a person like Sid who dominates in the media the way he did. Especially now when the media is so fragmented and there's so much out there and so much on demand, and young people aren't watching television anymore. They're all doing it on their phones or their devices, and the business has obviously changed because of that.
Yeah, I had heard a story, and maybe you had told it to me, but I heard a story that somebody had found Sid's tape recorder because he left it behind. They hid it from him, so that and then he went frantic looking for that tape recorder that he always had.
Oh, we did things like take his we would take the batteries out of his recorder. I remember one time on the Vikings plane. We used to fly on the Vikings plane, the media did, and believe it or not, it was one of the flight attendants who became Denny Green's wife. Sid fell asleep, and he was sleeping with his hands up like this. And we talked the flight attendant into putting paper or fingernail polish on Sid's hands. So when Sid woke up, he had pink fingernails. Well, Sid was not real happy about it. He didn't have a sense of humor about that. So the next thing you knew, we all know what that stuff smells like that takes off the thing. Well, the whole plane smelled like that. The players are complaining. It was just, that it was always something with Sid. The media then the other thing we'd do to him all the time. So they would always have on the plane, they would have name tags where the media would sit. And Sid, every single time he walked off the airplane, never forgot that we were doing it. We took all our name tags and we put it on the back of his coat. So Sid would walk out and have a coat full of name tags. But he would do it every week and he would never check. And you can only imagine when he got home, I could just hear him yelling at us. But that was our Sid.
Hi, Joe. This is Lynette.
Hi, Lynette.
I'll be honest, I haven't read your books, but I think you brought up a really good point about DNA. My question to you is, for many of the veterans, especially those who get those rejections, you know, time and time again. In the military, a lot of the rejection is black and white. If you're rejected from a promotion board or what have you, you know why. And when you go for a job and you get rejected again, any word to the wise on keeping that that rememberable DNA? Does that, hopefully my question makes sense, because that sometimes that really weighs on you. And when you come from a culture of being black and white, that gray area can wear on someone.
Yes, and I certainly don't understand it, so I can't say I walk in your shoes. But what I can say is that I think the best way to deal with disappointment is to deal with it right away and kind of get it all out. I think people who let it linger, you know, you can do two things. You can get bitter or you can get better. And I think that when we have a disappointment in our life, when we have a sad moment in our life, if we prolong it, we tend to get bitter. I was just talking to a friend about it today. A mutual friend of ours lost his job, had been with his organization, had been one of the sports organizations in town for 20 years, did a great job and lost his job. And we both talked to him and we were both amazed at his attitude, saying, you know, I had a good run. It's now time for me to look for something else. And anyway, we both kind of surmised he was really mad when it first happened, which he understood. So he kind of got through it, you know, and then you go back to the perseverance. You know, then you got to just go back to, you know, I tell my kids all the time, you know, the fastest horse doesn't win the race. The smartest person in the room doesn't always get the deal or get the promotion, but the scrappiest person, the person who grinds every day and gets up and knows that there's going to be times they're going to get knocked off the horse, and they know there's going to be times they get kicked in the pants, but they just keep coming back. And sometimes that's really hard. And sometimes you got to allow yourself not to do it. But there are other times when you just have to keep plugging along, And I know that's hard to do when it's black and white. And I know it's hard to do when it's unfair. You know, I always think when you're a kid, nobody really tells you that life many times is unfair because it is. But you know, it's not what happens to you. We all know this. It's how you react to what happens to you. And you can react two ways. You can react emotionally or you can react intellectually. So get the emotion out of the way so you can then go to the intellectual part of it. I don't know if that advice helps at all, but that certainly would be something I'd think about. See what else you got.
Cheers. Thank you.
So, yeah, Joe, you might be reading it right now, Joe. Dave is having some audio issues, but he's curious about who you would list as the top 3 Minnesota sports figures, whether it's players, coaches, et cetera, who had the most impact on sports in the state.
Okay. Well, it's kind of easy, I think, for me. Kirby Puckett is my #1 all-time favorite. I came in about the same time Kirby was a rookie, and I saw him turn into this mega superstar and this iconic figure in Minnesota, and he never really changed. And he was an amazing, you know, when they talk about someone who walks in the room and lights up the room, that was Kirby Puckett. There was no question about that. You know, when Kirby started having problems later in his life, I think it was because of the way his career ended, because he was human after all. I mean, you got to take a look that Kirby got glaucoma, a day or two after he, you know, had a base hit and was doing really well down in spring training. He was coming off a great year. I mean, at the peak of his career, what he is best at, what he lived his whole life for, it was taken away in the snap of the fingers. And at that news conference, everybody in this news conference in the Halsey Hall room in the balls of the Metrodome is crying, including the media. I remember looking at Paul Mahler, and he looked at me, and we're both weepy-eyed. And he said, he's doing good. He's going to handle it. But he really wasn't. He struggled with that for a while after. But Kirby was dynamic. The other one, I think, I'm just thinking that Herb Brooks, Herbie with the Miracle on Ice and what he has done for the sport of hockey and continuing the legacy of John Mariucci and others before him. Minnesota is the state of hockey, and Herb Brooks is certainly one of the reasons that it is. And I guess probably the last sports figure would probably be Bud Grant, when you take a look at what he did with the Vikings and the championships he won. And, he was a stoic character. He was a different kind of coach. but you talk to anybody who played for him, they love him to death, because he knew how to motivate a team. He knew that he had to motivate people differently. I remember I had a conversation with Bud about 2 years ago, and I said to Bud, I said, what does leadership mean to you? And he goes, well, I see some of these guys yelling and screaming and hollering and doing these pep talks. He goes, what you had to figure out is what motivated each player. He goes, I had to figure out which player needed a kick in the pants, and I had to know which player needed a hug. And he goes, once I kind of figured that out, I knew I could motivate him and get him to the next level. And I think when you take that and transfer that into the business world, that's probably the same way. You know, I think that there are people in our that we work in our own walks of life that we do need to push. And there are other ones where you better be patting them on the back all the way along. You know, you better be giving them praise all the way along. You know, I might have said this in the speech, and if I did, I apologize, but you know, there's like 7 or 8 generations in the workplace right now. And the one thing we all have in common, there might be difference in generations, but the one thing we all have in common, whether you're 80 or 80, is we all want to be acknowledged. We all want to know we have value. We all want to be recognized. So people who make an impact, who have that part of their DNA, do that. And sometimes you schedule yourself to do it. Just make sure it kind of happens, that you acknowledge people along the way, reward progress, let people know you care, ask one more question. All those little things add up to big things.
That's great. Thanks, Joe.
Yes, well, thank you.
Other questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
Well, somebody said that was the top 3 people they would come up with. There were others. You know, the one thing I will just kind of go off on that a little bit. When people ask me my most memorable interviews, well, I've interviewed, you name it, I've interviewed them. Tiger Woods, Muhammad Ali, those names I just named, Lindsey Whalen, U.S. women's soccer team. I mean, on and on. But my most memorable interview was with a college football coach at Northwestern College in Roseville, a guy by the name of Chubb Reynolds. He was dying of cancer, and he was still coaching his football team. And I spent a 2-hour practice with Chubb on his golf cart, and he was giving me his lessons in life. It was my Tuesdays with Maury moment. To this day, I regret that I wasn't able to record the entire conversation, because I would have had a book. But it was just, he was an impact player. And then when he did die, I went to his funeral, and the stories the players were telling and people were telling about him, it was just going that extra mile all the time. And I remember they were going to name the football stadium after him. He didn't think he was worthy of it. And I thought at his funeral, I thought he was worthy of it. So those are the fun stories to tell.
Hey, Joe. Thanks so much. I'm Michelle Bonfilio. It's so great to have you tonight, and your presentation was so engaging. I love this idea of impact players, and what we find here is when we're working with each other and working with veterans, every single one is an impact player in their own way, but nobody ever tells us that. Getting the story out of them is the most difficult part. And one of the things that really stood out from your presentation was you said you make the biggest impression when you're not trying to make an impression. Yeah. The question I keep being curious about is, when we have these magnificent, amazing veterans and military folks who've achieved so much and they're transitioning into the civilian career, we want to help them make this amazing impression without, trying to make an impression, but yet they're so geared not to talking about what they've done. They're just used to being part of that team. Help us, talk to us a little bit about how do you make that impression without trying to make that impression, please?
Yeah, it's how are you not the hero of your own story, right? And that's sometimes hard to do, because I'm sure many of the stories, I think you have to almost turn it the other way and say, how can you ask more questions? How can you get the conversation going? Because what happens normally in a conversation is, if I start asking you questions like, how long have you been working with veterans? Why do you like working with veterans? When did you start working with veterans? At a certain point, you're going to come back and ask me a question. So it's going to be easier for me to go to that next level. the more you can find out about a person, the more commonality you have, it's a lot easier to make that connection. And when you make a connection, then it's just a lot easier to continue the conversation. One of the exercises I use when I'm with companies, when they want to work on team culture, is I design a bingo card. And the bingo card will have traits on it. It might say like, you sang in the choir in high school. You're a great gardener. You read 10 books a month. All these different kinds of traits that people have. And then I make people go around the room and fill out the bingo card. They compete with it. They're not even realizing what they do. And then at the end, I ask them a question. I said, how many of you learned something about somebody you've known for a long time? And they're like, they raise their hand. I never knew the guy was a Star Wars fan. Now you have a commonality. Now you have a connection. From there, you can hopefully take it to the next level. You know, you're a great fisherman. Have you ever fished up on Mille Lacs? How do you use a Lindy rig off of the reef off of there? You know, the next thing you know, you have that connection. So I think the conversation can start maybe with just better questions and becoming a better listener. Do you listen?
Warm up and snow on the way. The timing up ahead.
Oh, geez. I've got my channel 5 thing on here yet. Sorry about that. I'll have to, let me get out of that thing real quick. That's okay. Now I think I'm out of it. Sorry about that. Am I back on? I'm okay.
Yes, you're good.
Okay.
No problem.
I hope that was a good answer for.
So to follow up, if somebody were shy and you wanted them to be able to come out of that shell, or they didn't really want to talk about all those great things about them so much, what advice would you give them to be more of an impact player, to be more comfortable making an impact on themselves, talking about themselves?
I didn't turn this thing off. I apologize. I've got 2 live feeds up, and I thought I turned the audio off on one. So that's a really good question. And it's hard because, you know, I'm gonna try this one more time.
Plus, despite a cooler night here tonight, we're actually looking at a warm-up moving in. I'll have that timing at 9.
I had one too many buttons. Sorry about that.
No problem.
We were talking about the shyness. You know, you don't have to. You can be an introvert and lead. You know, that's really hard. But maybe it's not yes and no questions. Maybe it's just finding out what their passion is.
I'm timing out a warm up on the way, and I'll show you when to expect.
These promos only last a couple minutes.
Right at 10 o'clock. Watch my forecast first, just minutes away.
Yeah, I'm thinking that's the last one. I'm hoping that's the last one. They're cutting the promos now. Here, you're learning something about TV. They're cutting the promos now. That if you watch prime time tonight, that's what you will see. But anyway,
tonight at 10, I'm timing out a warm up headed this way, and I'll show you when to expect our next chance for snow as well. Plus, skip the wait and get my 3-day outlook right at 10 o'clock. Watch my forecast first, coming up tonight.
See, there you go. We now know what's the warming trends coming. So I guess what I would do is try to figure out what their passion is and what they want to talk about. You know, sometimes when I'll interview,
warm up and more snow on the way. The timing up ahead.
Sometimes we interview someone, they're a little bit shy about being interviewed. And I'll say, I'm going to ask you, you know, let's say I'm talking to them because they're a fan of the Gopher game. I'm going to ask you about the Gopher, something you know and you have passion about. So maybe it's finding out what their passion is. Maybe it's finding out what their purpose is. Maybe it's throwing out something about who is your hero and why, and just kind of getting the conversation going a little bit with some kind of open-ended questions that hopefully they can take. You know,
the timeline of warmer weather moving in and the check. Nope.
I hope nobody swears on this thing and wrecks. So I know, Michelle, those are very tough things.
The timeline of warmer weather moving in and a check of snow moving in this weekend when nightcast continues.
Are you sitting in a room with them one-on-one? Is that kind of where you're at?
Well, this is actually about my asking questions. I'm
Okay.
thinking about how, these are, thank you, this is magnificent advice too. I'm thinking about so much of the magnificent advice in your presentation, this idea about making an impression, but subtly, right?
Yeah.
When someone is all about subtlety and all about it, we get so many folks who serve constantly, so many folks who are veterans. As you know, the last thing that anybody wants to do is say, hey, I did this, I did this, I did this. And that's the kind of individual, how do you encourage someone to make that impression? You know, how do you encourage them to be even more of an impact player in civilian life, in that form, to come out and say it's okay in civilian life to do that in a way that you might not do it in the military, in this amazing, purpose, persistence, passion way that you teach?
Well, sometimes when I work with teams, I'll say something. I say, now normally the whole key is not making it about you, but let's take our humble hat off now for a while, and now let's make it about you. What was a time when you did something for somebody else that really made you feel good? Don't worry about bragging here. This is the time to brag, because this is a safe zone for doing that. And then you can ask them, how did that make you feel? How can you do more like that? And then turn it around the other way. When did somebody help you through a tough time? When did somebody do something, have a silent impact on you? And sometimes you maybe would give them an example in your life so they kind of understand. When I first started doing this, and I don't think I told the story because I don't tell her as much, I probably should, but one of the first silent impacts I had on me that I can remember was in college. A bunch of us guys went from the dormitory, we're freshmen in college. We went down to this McDonald's, and we went to happy hour. Then we went to this McDonald's. We made a huge mess, and we all went back to the dorms. Well, one of the guys stayed back and cleaned up the McDonald's. So I was going back there. I said, what are you doing this for? They got people. He said, we made the mess. We clean up the mess. Well, it had an impact on me, because from that time on, whenever I'm in a McDonald's or any fast food restaurant, I clean my table. I clean the table next to it. And guess what? Here's what happens. My kids do, because they know it. They know the story. There's power in a story. There's a power in example. So maybe just try to get them to get their humble hat off. Sometimes it might not be shy. Sometimes, and I think probably certainly in the military, you're not told to do this very often, unless you got a bunch of bars on.
Outstanding. Thank you very much. Thanks, Joe.
Hey, Joe, this is Patrick Sauer. I've worked for years at Optum working on the Veteran Transition and Resilience app, because those soldiers who are in transition, and they're usually the age between 18 and 34, have the highest rate of suicide. And transition is a huge challenge for them. And we did a lot of research on it. But, I was curious about the parallel with professional athletes who are, at the top of their game, and they've got these huge fan clubs following them. And then all of a sudden they retire and they're nobody again. They're just a regular Joe on the street. And I was just curious, are there any parallels or lessons learned from helping them in transition that we could bring to our own brothers and sisters who wore the uniform?
Well, the first thing I will say is that I've seen a change in this over the years. First of all, every team now has people to help the transition. They have life skills people because of the money and because of the short careers. So you go back to the 60s and 70s, and you go back to the old Vikings. Bill Boom Boom Brown was selling paper in the off season because he wasn't making enough as a football player. Now, if you took Bill Brown's stats and you put him in today's day and age, he would make so much money he'd never have to work again. But not everybody makes that kind of money. When the cheers stop, there are a lot of issues for players, because a little bit like the military, sometimes, maybe probably not like the military, athletes don't get to control their ending very often. It's not very often that John Elway retires after winning the Super Bowl. You know, that for every John Elway who retires after a Super Bowl, you got a player who got cut, a player who got hurt and couldn't make it back. You have some sad stories. So they try to teach the transition, but I think when we're younger, especially like soldiers, there's an invincibility that we all have, that we all think we're strong enough, we're smart enough, we're good enough, and we're going to get through it. But then real life happens. And I also know that it's interesting that you brought it up, because as you were saying this, I remember talking to the Minnesota Sheriff's Association, and they were talking about not getting as many police officers as they used to get because of the military, because now the young men and women who come out of the military have seen so much and have been through much and have done tours of duty that they don't want any part of it anymore. There used to be a nice transition into law enforcement, and now they don't want to do that anymore. So it's real, it's tough, it's acknowledged. I guess the only thing that I would say is the earlier you could get to them, the better. You know, the smart athletes are thinking about, you know, what they're going to be doing when their days are over, long before they're over. They want to get everything they can out of it. And I would imagine that there are some people in the military that they get discharged and then they have now what do I do kind of thing. And nobody's telling them what to do anymore either, which is a lot different. I know that I remember talking to Chad Greenway. And Chad played for the Vikings a lot of years, and Chad was smart. Chad had plans, and he was working on what he wanted to do when his career was over. But I remember talking to him about a year later, and he said, you know, the biggest thing for me is I'm not scheduled anymore. Mm-hmm. And I would imagine in the military, you know, you're getting up at 0600 hours, you're eating at this time, you're going to the bathroom at this time. They tell you when you can take a shower. And in pro sports, it's a little bit that way too. So there are adjustments to be made, but I think maybe the learning's got to be as much as you can in the front end. So
great, thank you.
Yeah, and are you familiar with SAVE, the organization? No. SAVE? Dr. Dan Reidenbach is a friend of mine, and it's a suicide prevention program that they run. And I know he's worked with the military in the past. He's been involved in a couple of a couple of presidents have called him in on things like that. And he's right here in Minnesota. If you want a connection, I'd be happy to connect you.
All right, thank you.
Bet.
Joe, I got a quick question that kind of ties in with some of the other stuff that's come through, and that is when you think back of all the, gosh, I don't know, probably tens of thousands of interviews maybe you've done over the years, what was the most challenging, the most difficult interview that you ever did to get someone to talk to, and how did you end up navigating around it maybe with some of these principles to get them to open up and talk to you? How did you walk through that?
You're asking me about my most difficult interviews, and remember, I covered Randy Moss. You know, the most difficult ones, quite frankly, are sometimes, you know, going into a heartbroken locker room. I remember going into the locker room when the Gopher basketball team almost made it to the Final Four. Kevin Lynch missed that shot at the end. They almost made it to the Final Four. And, you know, 10 minutes after the game's over, you got everybody in there crying, and you got to go ask questions because that's your job. That's tough because you're human and you feel that too. But there are also athletes who purposely would be hard, Randy Moss being one of them. And sometimes I think when you first start off in the business, at least when I first started off, I was a big fan. And then all of a sudden you kind of turn over into, now I'm a journalist, and now I'm there to get my job done. You just did your job, I have to do my job. And you kind of take less gruff than maybe you would have taken earlier in your career. And you're less intimidated than you were the first time somebody growled at you in an interview. So I always have a default question, kind of going back a little bit, but what we were talking about before. I always have a default question. Just, I think sometimes you have to have a default position when you know something bad's going to happen. And my default question is always, well, describe yourself as an athlete. You know, who are you like? What are you like? And anyway, that will give me a minute, because they're going to they love talking about themselves. There's no humility there. They'll be happy to talk about themselves. I can warm them up, and then I can hit them with, what do you think about the trade rumors? The real question I was trying to get get to. So, yeah, that's a hard thing to do. But all in all, I'd say Minnesota's fairly blessed. I think the Minnesota nice kind of wears on people after a while. We've been pretty lucky. Face it, there are gonna be some guys who just don't want to talk to the media, and that's going to happen.
Got it. Thank you. All right, we're getting towards the end. Folks, any other questions for Joe, please?
Yeah, I'm here all night. No more promos I don't hear. Well, let me ask you a question. What does the camaraderie mean to you being part of this Eagle group? Because it would seem to me that, that's a little bit what it's all about, a brotherhood, a sisterhood, but you all have something in common. And that's what I always talk about people. When you have the commonalities, it's just a lot easier to have a deeper, more meaningful connection. It's a lot easier to understand where people come from. I think I probably said in the speech, we asked the question, if there was a going away party tonight, who would the most people show up for? Well, we also asked the opposite question, who would the least amount of people show up for? And that person, of course, didn't have any of the traits an impact player would have. But then we peeled back the onion a little bit further because we tried to figure out, well, why does this person who somebody thought was the perfect fit and hired this person and then turns out to be a bad fit? Well, we found out that many times this person was unproductive, unfriendly, uncooperative, lazy, whatever the case might be, because the job was too big for them. That's why they were frustrated. That's why they were a difficult employee. That's why they were a difficult coworker. So as a leader or as a coworker, you either try to supplement that person with some help, you move them to another position, or in some cases you have to dismiss them because it wasn't a good call. But many times that job's too big, and that's the way it manifests itself. So great. So I'm getting back to your question. Why is this group together?
Well, I think I'll start with one thing, but I'd love other people to chime in. I think the camaraderie piece you talked about, Schmidt, Joe, was, I'm not sure if you might have seen this about us, but it's the first of our three pillars here. We have 3 C's: camaraderie, capabilities, and commitment. And to me, they're all equally important, but I think the camaraderie thing is one of the first things that brings us all together. I know for me, I was going through a difficult job transition a few years ago, and it wasn't until I really started getting dialed in with this group, being a veteran myself, and getting back in touch with that and having everybody around me supporting me and helping me and making me feel good and knowing when to kind of call me on stuff. Like, because I am certainly just as guilty of what Michelle was talking about as anyone else on here, where I was more concerned. I didn't want to bring my concerns and issues up to the table and wanted to help others first. But they would, this crowd could sit there and they had every right to call me on it and say, look, like you were just saying, this is about you for a minute. Don't worry about it. Everyone else is being all right. What about you? And, that was great. And it helped change my mindset, and being able to spend time with these people keeps at the front of my head. And I know that. So it's because a lesson that I had forgotten about that I learned when I was in the Marine Corps, which I was very glad to hear that that's where you were thinking about going, was the Marine Corps for a while, was that I had an officer tell me at one point, he pulled me aside and closed the door and said, look, I appreciate how concerned you are about everybody else. It's a really great quality. But every leader has to also understand that if you don't look out for yourself at some point, to at least some degree, you will then start hurting and affecting everybody else. So for me, that's part of the reason why the camaraderie piece is so important, is it's kept me grounded. But I'd love to hear what anyone else might have to say too.
Yeah, I believe you're right. And not only that, it's the shared values. Who else in a job, writes a blank check up to and including their life to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I think when we know everybody on this call has taken that oath, I think, it's serving a higher purpose and sharing those common values, those common bonds, because, we all were taught that we're one team and we rely on each other.
I would say, Joe, when I joined Eagle Group, in Minnesota, there's no active duty military bases. So the military community and the veteran community is kind of hidden. And I had gotten out of the military in 2012 and I found Eagle Group in 2014. And I remember after coming home from my first meeting, I thought, oh my gosh, I found my people. Because for 2 years, I didn't even know I was missing it until I got back in a room full of my brothers and sisters and realized that I was missing that camaraderie where we all understand each other. When you enter the civilian culture, you kind of feel like a stranger in a foreign land because they don't understand where you're coming from, or you speak a different language than them, different terminologies. And so getting together once a month with my fellow veterans is just something that I look forward to every month. And so I love Eagle Group.
That's all fantastic. That's great. So it serves its purpose. So then that no wonder it's a success. One of the words I heard somebody say was mindset. And it reminds me, I think I made a breakthrough a few months back when I was thinking about, we always talk about having a positive attitude. From the time you're a little kid, have a better attitude, you got to have a positive attitude. And I've kind of changed it, realizing that it's okay once in a while to have a bad attitude. But what's bad is if you have a bad mindset. Your mindset has to be that you want to do good in the world. Your mindset has to be that it's not all about you, it's about other people. And when you can kind of change your mindset, I think it changes kind of the framework of your life a little bit. You allow yourself to be a human, which means we make mistakes, we goof up, but then at the same time, you have the mindset of how can I be better? How can I recover from these mistakes? How can I, help other people? Inspire them, do anything, just shovel someone's lawn, say hi. You just, all these little things make a big difference. It's like a bank account, right? Equity. You build friendship equity and relationship equity, and there's be that net giver instead of the net taker. And I think that really it's huge. And obviously anybody who's been in the service has given more of themselves than anybody will ever realize. So especially civilians like us who did not.
Any other questions or commentary from anyone?
Anything else in the chat? Well, it's really been a pleasure, to be with you here today. I admire what you do. I remember when my brother-in-law served in Iraq, and I remember when he went off, and I'm talk about feeling guilty. I was at like a 2-week road trip for work. I was at spring training and then went somewhere else, and I was really missing my family. And I was like, he's not going to see his family for a year, and I was like, it was a good wake up moment every once in a while to realize, wow, what you've done is pretty amazing. And I don't think people realize that. Bill Pop is one of my good friends from PopCom. You might hear him on CCO radio, and he runs a foundation, the Minnesota Military Foundation. And that foundation was so great because it was 100% set up for the families of the military. If your spouse or your partner was serving overseas and all of a sudden the furnace went out, this foundation made sure that furnace was taken care of, and still does to this day. So there are a lot of people out there who I think, and that might be the other message to this group. There are a lot of people out there who would really like to help them, but maybe don't know how to help. So maybe that's something that this group can discuss and figure out ways that me and other people who admire the military but aren't part of it, how we can help out besides sending a check somewhere. That certainly might be something to think about.
We appreciate that very much, Joe, and we'd love to engage with you on that, and anyone else that you feel that it might be important for us to talk to. That's a lot of what we're trying to do here, and we're super grateful. On behalf of the entire Eagle Group of Minnesota veterans, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us this evening. You have a tremendous message. It certainly hit a lot of things for me, and I'm getting a lot of thumbs up and stuff from people around here. I know that this really resonated, And I just don't think we can thank you enough for your time and your effort here this evening.
Oh, thank you. That'll make me sleep well tonight. As I always say, I sleep like a baby. I get up every 3 hours crying.
That's great.
So thank you.
Well,
I salute you. I salute you for your service, and it's been my pleasure to be here today.
Thank you very much, Joe. Have a great evening. We look forward to connecting with